What up, what up, what up? Welcome to this week's episode of Pels Pod, a New Orleans Network podcast. As always, I am your host, Raphael Rattler, joined by my fellow middle brother, Garrick Rattler. What's poppin' with you, bro?
What up, man? I'm enjoying the play. Excellent. Wish the Pels. I think it's a little more relaxing when the team that you're covering or the teams that you root for aren't in there, because you get to appreciate the game of basketball for the poetry that it's been some really good games. A lot of people getting injured, people getting suspended, people getting ejected. It's like watching the NBA and the WWE all at once. But it's been a fun ride. But everything's good in the city though, man. It's been some really weird weather. I got a hoodie on like going into May, which is weird, but here we are. But it's all good, man. How's everything on your end?
Everything is good. I can't complain too much. You're right. I mean, it's been a wild playoff series one. Like we didn't even make it to the second round yet. Like I know, everywhere you look, man, somebody is hurt, somebody's thrown out, somebody's ejected. Like again, like it's fun to watch. You wish the Pels were in that mix because something tells me they'd be involved in a couple scuffles or two. But all in all, it's been good to go. And speaking of good to watch, shout out Josh Hart and Nikhil, man. Like again,
hey man.
To say that, the team got better, acquiring CJ and Larry Nance with their departure. Shout out to Josh for his first time being in the playoffs, dropping 19 and 7, Trey Murphy in attendance, Nikhil playing overtime minutes, starting rotation minutes. You got Ant talking about how important Nikhil's to the team. Again, like it's one of those things where situations matter so much for players. And for Josh, you always felt like he was a player on a championship winning team, but he couldn't be your second or third best option every single night. And now he's put in a situation where he doesn't have to do that. Now Nikhil is kind of put in a situation where he has offensive freedom, is helping him play defensively and things like that. It's just cool to see stuff like that. I don't know how you feel about it, but watching other Pelicans thrive in different situations, you don't necessarily root for their winning outcome, but it's cool to watch them play.
Nah, man, I think it's okay to find some joy in seeing guys that were in the city and obviously in different stages of the development. When you talk about Josh Hart, you talk about Nikhil, but you see these guys getting into these situations and playing in some of the most pressure-packed games and contributing. Right, Josh Hart. I mean, he is a Tibbs guy. Like if you ask Tom Thibodeau. Who like on his team like encapsulates the coach that he has been his entire career. Josh Hart is that. There's a clip going around of Josh Hart telling Tibbs, "Hey, I'll play 48 if you need me to." And I mean, as somebody who watched Josh Hart a couple of years here, that sounds like Josh Hart. That sounds like a Josh Hart type of thing. So I think it's good to see. Obviously, Nikhil with his offensive freedom, but I think the thing that is setting Nikhil apart is he's picking up guys full court. Like he looks like a version of Jose, right? Or a version of Pat Bev out there, just picking guys up full court and competing. And so it's good to see these guys kind of get out and spread their wings in the playoffs. And you want them to do well because those are such nice guys. But it's awesome to see it again. Wish the Pelicans were there. But it's like watching the Pelicans in spirit when you see Josh Hart and Nikhil kind of get out there and do what they do.
For sure. And before we get too far on the show, so we got a lot to talk about today. Make sure you guys follow us on IG at Pels Podcast. Follow us on Twitter at Pels Pod. Like the episode below. And most importantly, subscribe to NewOrleans.net. Shout out to NewOrleans.network with their first IPA that just launched yesterday. Big things coming, including on the food and beverage front. So shout out to the network. Shout out to Nick and them boys.
Multifaceted company, man. Shout out to Nick.
Yes, sir. Before we jump into Pelican stuff, how you feel about the Ime Udoka going to Houston? How you feel about the young team with a coach that's got a little bit of checkered past, let's call it that, but some stops and some shows of winning and success too?
Yeah, I think this is a situation where they both need each other. Udoka needs another avenue back into the coaching ranks, and Houston needs a disciplinarian, right? We've seen it with that team just be undisciplined and young, and I think he needs a way in, and they need a disciplinarian in a way that it's kind of similar to when he was coming back with the Nets, right? The Nets were going through what they were going through, and it was, oh, he might come here and be the coach because they needed each other. And I think, some time has passed. Again, for one, I don't know what the situation is and what he did actually in Boston. I heard, you hear stuff, but there's never been like, hey, this is what happened. And so I hope all parties have been, resolution and restituted, but I think they both need each other. And, we'll see. I mean, Udoka, last time we saw his on-court stuff, he was good. He was a good coach. So we'll see how it works out. But I think they need each other. And, the marriage is one that is going to be really, really, people going to watch it close because, Udoka has some things going on with him. But, we'll see. He'll be in the Pelicans division, so you'll get to see him 4 times a year. So it should be interesting.
Listen, you know what I'm happy for? I'm happy for Coach Silas because every time I saw that man on the sideline, he looked miserable. Like it didn't look like he had any joy in the game of basketball. So I'm glad maybe he will get a chance, to start something fresh somewhere else. So before we jump into what the Pelicans need and what are some of the weaknesses from the roster that was absorbed all year long with Zion, without Zion, whatever that may be, I think it's important to start with, what do we know, right? Because Griff, in his end of season press conference, he talked about, hey, the thing about the silver lining about the season and the ending is we know we're not good enough. We know that changes need to be made. We know it's probably more around the edges than the current core. And that's where I had to stop because what is the current core? Like, what does that mean? If you ask one Pelican fan, if you ask one media member, if you ask one, they'll probably all give you a different answer. So I want to start with what do we know, right? I think it's safe to say that the players that will be playing heavy minutes as long as they are available and their hamstrings and their knees and their shoulders and their fingers work.
The toe
are Zion Williamson, Brandon Ingram, CJ McCollum, Trey Murphy, and Herb Jones. I think those are the 5 players that if everyone is healthy, they will be on the court the majority of the time.
I agree.
The next set, I think, is a more solid, pretty solid, but I'm still not 100% sure. I'm not going to Vegas and putting money on it. So you got the pitbull. You just talk about the pitbull defender. You see it in Davion Mitchell. You see it in Garrett Payton Jr. You see it. All these playoff teams that are playing right now, everyone has that guy off the bench that can give your point guard hell and make things difficult. I think that's Jose Alvarado. I think it's going to be really hard for Kyra to take that role from Jose. Because of the trust that Jose's built with Willie, because of the bond that he has with B.I. and Najee and the rest of the team, because of the way the fans scream Jose, I think it's going to be very tough to take him from that role. Then you got the small ball 5, which is pretty much Larry Nance and, shout out E.J. Liddell. He's working his way back. He's able to go full. He's able to continue his work. They've been scouting him for 2 years. I think he's going to get every chance in the world to not only make the roster, but crack the rotation too. So between the small ball 5, you kind of have 2 break when in the inevitable
the emergency happens
when Larry Nance probably gets injured at some point. Again, you're not wishing anything about the player, but that's just what history is telling you. And then I think personally, Najee's a lock to be on the team because he just means so much to the team and the chemistry. Someone made this analogy to me on Twitter, and I couldn't agree more. Najee is like the CD Deuce to the Pelicans. CD, you take the stats. He had a crazy year this year. He had a crazy year this year with CD Deuce. Right. He had a crazy, but you take him away, and it felt like the locker room missed something. It felt like the defense was missing something. I feel the same way about Najee and his ability to impact the team both emotionally on the court and sometimes on the off the court as well. So in those scenarios, I feel like those 3 roles are taken. Outside of that, bro, I don't know. I don't know what is to be moved. I don't know what is to be changed. What is Kyra? We're going on year 4. We have no idea. Sebron, they talk really highly about his development and what he was able to do this year in the G League. Dyson, we just talked about last episode. Is he a point guard? Is he a wing? Where does he fit, in the grand scheme of things? So, there's a lot of unknowns. The 2 things that are known is that the Pelicans need shooters and the Pelicans need rim protection. Are there any other players or any other roles, I should say, that you think are locked down concrete by the players that are either in limbo with their contract or looking for a new contract from the Pelicans?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think one to be really looking at coming into this this summer camp, this training camp and things like that. I think you mentioned it. I think EJ Liddell, we need to start, we need to start paying attention to him, because Larry Nance said it himself on the Spaces that EJ Liddell might be the reason that Larry Nance doesn't have a job anymore. And I'm not, reporting or saying that that's going to happen. But if you look at, we'll get into like the cap measurements and what's the cap situation for the Pelicans and the money and everything that's involved. I think you have to think that if EJ Liddell is showing some of the things that Larry Nance showed, and he's able to stay healthy and kind of provide some of those things, I think that's something that should be watched, because again, they gave EJ Liddell a contract after he tore his ACL, and enough for him to travel with the team and go to all of these places and be on the road and working. So I do think, like you said, that they're going to give him every single chance to make the team and to also be effective. And, from what we saw from EJ Liddell, if you go back and look at his college highlights and even in some of the summer league games, that guy can defend. He can defend. There's clips of him like defending Paolo Banchero for like entire games back in Duke and when Duke and Ohio State played. So I think, they're going to give him an opportunity to show some of the things that he is good at. And if they come into a situation where you get close to the trade deadline or whatever the case is, and EJ Liddell is showing you some things that maybe he could come in and give you 70% of what Larry Nance is giving you 80%, especially if Larry Nance, continues to deal with his injury history. I think that is something that they might like into. So I think that EJ Liddell is the one that I'm looking at this summer to see, what do the Pelicans think about him? How much do they value him? And what's his role? Because if he has that role is going to be, you don't need to have another guy that's making the money that Larry Nance is making. You could probably use that money somewhere else to do other things. So I'm sure, Larry Nance is obviously, the veteran leader and the guy who comes in and does, a lot of the things that the Pelicans need done. But EJ Liddell is a young version of him, and we'll see if the Pelicans give him an opportunity to take that spot.
Right. His game is very similar to Larry, but he said it himself, like he thinks he's a little bit better of a shooter, and I would agree. Like the reason he went back to Ohio State, because he was kind of a tweener, like you didn't really know if he's a wing, if he's a small ball five, what is he? And what he went back to do was to improve his 3-point shot, and that's exactly what he did. And for a team that desperately needs spacing, again, that type of player would be comfortable. And again, I think that there's space for both, but how it goes down, I think is very crucial as well. And so something that you mentioned, the Pelicans are in a really weird spot. Like they're right under the luxury tax line. Like there's projected to be over the salary cap going into next year before they make their moves and things like that. And so they look at their roster, like typically when you see rosters like that, you kind of know these are your guys moving forward because they've either been there, lost, and figure out what tweaks around the edges. You still don't really know with this
not at all.
Pels team. All you do know is that CJ McCollum is making $35 million next year. Zion and BI are making $33 million next year. JV Valanciunas is making $15 million next year. And Larry Nance is making $10 million. Everybody else is just kind of getting in where they fit in. So you've got a lot of your salary cap tied into a couple of players that you've seen very little games out of. But what does that mean? There's not a whole lot of room in free agency. Like there's not a big splash. Like if you're hoping for a big splash, unless something is moved, and we talk about, Jonas Valanciunas potentially his fit being better in a different situation. Even then, you got to find someone to take the salary cap. And then even then, like you're going into competing with teams that are making contracts based on what the future looks like, not necessarily what does next year look like. Again, the Pelicans had some really high moments from this team, but I don't know if Miss Benson's like, yo, sign me up for the luxury tax right now for the team that did not make the playoffs. And so I think that they're going to try to stay underneath that. Plus, you got Herb Jones extensions coming up. You're going to have Trey Murphy III
Woo.
Extensions is right around the corner. So, what are your thoughts on that? Like, do you think the Pelicans can go big game hunting? And is there big game hunting to be had in this free agency class?
I don't think that there's a lot of big game hunting in this free agency class. Now, trades are a different story. Obviously, that is, you could get into some of the things that that is available there. But I do think that that there are some moves that can be made if you're willing to. And again, I go back to what Griff says, right? Everybody talks about, hey, Griff the salesman, right? Griff to this, Griff to that. And that's fine, right? That's all fair. That's all fair criticisms, and I'm all for fair criticism. But again, this is the one time that I've heard him after the season not rehash and reiterate the sustained success, right? We know the keywords, right? The hot buttons: sustained success, family atmosphere. There wasn't that after the season. It was we're not good enough and things need to change, right? And so that lets me know that, and again, I say this season that the Pelicans probably are better off not making the playoffs, because again, you could go into the playoffs and get a game or two and you could like sell yourself on, okay, man, if they just run it back. But when you miss the playoffs after being a number one seed for a while, like that screams change, right? That's something that's saying, okay, even if the guys were hurt, to go from one to out of the playoffs it's a sign of things needs to change. And so when you think about some of the things that are made, like you said, you're right at the salary cap. The luxury tax is staring you right in the face. I'm not sure, Gail has a lot of money, more money than I'll ever see in my life. But at the same time, the reason why rich people stay rich is because they try to make good financial decisions. And going into the luxury tax on a team, like you said, that hasn't really proven anything. Obviously, when the guys were humming and playing, they were the number one seed, but that's not what you pay for, right? You don't pay for the number one seed in December, right? You pay for what's going to happen in the playoffs, in the postseason. How far can this team get? And if you haven't shown anything, I don't blame her. I don't expect her to go into the luxury tax. So obviously the free agency, a lot of things are going to continue, kind of count on or be based on the all NBA selections, right? When you talk about Jaylen Brown and guys, and maybe there are big splashes that go that way. I do think that if the Pelicans, to be honest, I have a dark horse like move that, we could get into now or later with and I think it depends on the New York Knicks, and we could get into that a little bit when we talk about trades and things like that. But I think the Pelicans' future, this is again a hypothetical thing. I think it depends on what the New York Knicks want to do. If the New York Knicks want to go big game hunting for some of the stars that might be available, right? They're scratching the surface of being in the second round of the playoffs, and who knows how far they go in that round. But if they might get to a point where they're like, hey, we're one piece away. And if they go big game hunting, I think the Pelicans could kind of play a little bit like Sacramento did with Atlanta and Kevin Huerter. When Atlanta was like, oh, we're about to get DeJounte Murray, we need to get rid of some of these players. And Sacramento just sneakily slid in and got Kevin Huerter away from Atlanta so they could get DeJounte Murray. And I think if the Knicks do something like that, there's a guy on their team, and we'll get into that. I think if they try to like, hey, we could let's get away from this, we can go big game hunting and get one of these players. We need to get rid of somebody. I think the Pels can swoop in and make a move for him. A guy that I like, a hometown kid, which we'll get into. I think people know who I'm talking about. But I do think those are the kind of moves that the Pelicans are going to try to make. I think if they go for a big move, it'll be in a trade, because obviously you can't really sign anybody to your free agency. To your cap space.
Right. So you're looking at, the free agent class is just not great. And so, again, you're looking at the trade market. But first, you have to handle what's in-house. So the club has until June 29th to exercise their club option on Billy Hernangomez, which is about $2.5 million. I think that's a really great deal for Billy. But I also think it kind of depends on what happens with JV. Najee Marshall, $1.9 million. I think Najee's club option will be exercised. And then you got Herb Jones, which is wild that Herb Jones is under a $1.8 million club option, which I think an extension is inevitable in those circumstances.
Yes.
Are there any of those three players that you don't see on the Pelicans roster next year?
I'm going to say this.
Okay.
Billy is a great value. He's a great value at what he, what he makes and things like that. But I do think at some point, his unhappiness of not playing, I don't think it'll become an issue, but he's another one of those guys that's like pivotal in the locker room. And listen, this guy won Eurobasket MVP. He wants to play. If you check his likes on Twitter, it will show you that he wants to play. And so I think at some point, he's gonna start to say things like, "Hey, man, like I want to play," and that's fine. Like I have no problem with that. And so I'm interested to see how you balance, keeping him happy by not playing, because if JV's on the team, you're going to be in the same situation. But I think if you're getting rid of JV, then you're trying to find another starting caliber center, which would then bump him down into the same role, especially if you got Larry Nance, you got EJ Liddell, you got these guys like those guys are going to be playing small ball 5, and so you're back to Billy not being on the floor. So I'll be very interested to see, do they balance? Hey, look, we're just going to take the club option, exercise it, to hell with how you feel, which is it. This is what a team option is, right? Yeah. Right, it's the business. Like, we don't really care. Like, we're just gonna sign you. Or if they, if they say, okay, well, listen, we understand, we get it, and maybe you take that 1.9 or the 2.5 and go get another guy, maybe somebody else. Because I mean, first ships last. Obviously,
first ships last.
If you could trade Josh Hart, who was beloved by everybody in the organization, who came and was crying after he got traded, if you could get rid of that guy, respect and love to Billy Hernangomez, but that's a guy that can be moved as well. So I'll be very interested to see what they do with his contract. Again, I do believe that Najee is a lock to be on this team because of what he means. But it's a business, and it would not surprise me if they say, you know what, we'll take that 2.5 and that $2 million from Najee. That's almost $5 million, and try to do something else with it. But I do see Najee coming back. But Billy's the one I'm like, I could see them saying, you know what, you don't really have a role here. Very similar to JV. Like, you are obviously capable of contributing, but there's the fit here or the role here is just not going to be what you want and what you expect. And instead of it being a locker room issue or something that's going around in the team all season, they just cut ties and try to find a way to get that production from somewhere else.
Yeah. For Billy, I think he needs the opposite of most situations. I think he needs to go to a team that starts a small ball 5 so that he can be the big off the bench versus being the small ball 5 on another team, because I think most people would rather
Sacramento, man. Sacramento. You'll go ahead and play us a bonus out there, let him do all that, and then bring in the bruiser down the low.
Right. So you got those 3. Then you've got Jose on the non-guaranteed contract. Something tells me that will be picked up.
Yeah.
But then you've got Garrett Temple, who is making a non-guaranteed $5.4 million. He says he has no plans on retiring. I know the bond he has with Willie. I know the veteran leadership. But I can't see Garrett Temple on the roster next season. What are your thoughts? At $5.4 million?
Yeah, I think the veteran, you could get some cheaper veteran leadership. I wish Udonis Haslem doing these days. Listen, Garrett Temple, we'll always remember the game he had against Luka, the 19 points to close the game. We'll always remember that. You'll remember the golfing with Willie Green and things like that. But I think that it is time. And listen, the NBA, you are playing in windows. And when you have 82 games and injury-prone stars and injury-prone players, you have to make every spot on your roster count, right? You have to make every spot. And so when you have guys at the end of the bench that are just sitting, like just not doing anything, like I get the veteran leadership. I get that, right? But you have CJ, you have JV, you have like Brandon Ingram's not a young player anymore. Like you have these guys, like he's a young in age, but he's been in the league for a while,
Right.
and been through some things. So, you got guys that, and there's other veterans around, right? You found Josh Richardson on a trade deadline deal if you need that kind of things. But at this point, man, you got to be able to have guys that in the event that you need to have them play, you could play. Garrett Temple could not play, right? He just could not be. You put him on the floor and he immediately get attacked. Obviously he could shoot and things like that, but he wasn't a guy that Willie Green, as much as he loved his guy and hanging with him and being bros and friends with him, he just didn't trust him. And I as an older guy, when a guy is old, when the first thing that come out of his mouth is, I have no intentions on retiring. You can find those kind of leadership, those kind of guys in the locker room. Hey, go call James Johnson up. See what he's doing, man. He can come back and give some of that veteran leadership and also be a Swiss Army knife on offense and a good defender. But you can find guys like that. But for $5 million, I think that's a wrap.
I'm with you. Then you got the two ways. We just talked about EJ Liddell. He'll be on the roster. I think they're going to give C. Brown a real shot. I think his summer league is going to mean a lot. I think that whoever they draft, if they keep the pick, will mean a lot and things like that. But I think the praise has been high for him coming out of this past season. And then you have the free agent, Josh Richardson. You just talked about him. I don't know. Something tells me again, like he played a role, but I think that's a role that we just talked about it. I think you need to move that towards a shooter versus a defender who can shoot, right? So,
or if you need that, you have Dyson Daniels. He's there. He's on the roster. If you need that particular player, Dyson Daniels is right there.
Right. So the only other free agent that leaves is the infamous Jackson Hayes. He's a restricted free agent. They have until June 30th to match his qualifying offer. Here's my thing. Most people think that, the relationship between the Pelicans and Jackson's over and, he's going to go get a contract and play a bunch of minutes somewhere else. I'm not super sure about that because I'm not sure the NBA is Jackson Hayes, I can't wait to give him $12 million a year. Tell me the team that's looking like you might have a team like the Spurs that are just trying to fill salary cap so they don't have to pay a penalty or something like that. But even then, I don't see them paying Jackson like a double-digit per year contract when he has very little to show for it. And oh, by the way, if you want to look for a more recent example of a player like Jackson Hayes who's shown promise but not been consistent, Mo Bamba, who also went to Texas, also plays center, also got a 3 for $30 contract, and also does not play for the team that he's currently on right now. So, people will look at that and say, yeah, you want to take a chance, but how much is the chance? And so in that scenario, I think there's a world in which Jackson could end up back on the team for a prove-it deal. Hey, one for something. If you end up being something, you got an opportunity. Just similar to how Josh Hart's contract worked out, and then he got traded the next year. Hey, we're going to give you a prove-it deal that you can earn up to a certain thing because we're going to need bodies. We're going to need bigs. What are your thoughts on it? Or do you think that's it, wipe your hands clean?
So I definitely hear what you're saying about, there's an opportunity for him to come back on a prove-it deal. But honestly, I think Jackson is the type that would go to the Spurs because he knows at least he'll play. You'll be able. You can't really have a prove-it deal if you don't get the chance to prove it, right? And we've seen time and time again that Willie Green does not trust Jackson. He doesn't give Jackson the same kind of leash that he gives other guys, and he pulls him, and those things. And I think that Jackson is a guy that'll say, well, at least I can go to San Antonio and I can play. I'll get those minutes. And then maybe I can get traded to another team, or I can play out the 1-year contract there, get those minutes, and then do my prove-it deal somewhere else. So it's going to be tough. For my money, I think that Jackson Hayes has a spot on the Pelicans. I think that what he brings to the team, there is nobody else on the Pelicans that can do that, right? Be it tall. I wish Willie Green would play him more than him just leaving and things, because he has some things to work out, right? He has some things to work out on offense. He has some things to work out as far as shot selection and his confidence in himself, which is a good thing. Right. Good thing, bad thing. But yeah, because the confidence and decision making. But I think that, he's a rim protector. He's a jumping jack. And in this new NBA where you're trying to find the balance between finding a guy that won't get dominated by the Joel Embiid's, but isn't a lumbering guy running up and down the floor like JV per se. I think that Jackson is a guy that, in modern NBA, we were clamoring for a switchable big that could shot block, and he was sitting on the roster, on the bench. And so for my money, I would see what his qualifying offer is. Maybe you let him go out and see what other contract he could get. But I think that Jackson is one of those guys that would go to another team. Obviously, we've heard things about him wanting to play very similar to Billy. But I think that he has a spot for the Pelicans. The Pelicans are going to need, unless you go out and get one of these guys that we're going to be talking about when you talk about bigs, or if you draft a big, unless you're doing that, what you have to address the rim protection. And if you can't afford anybody, then your best bet might be Jackson Hayes, playing some of those minutes at small slim ball 5. So we'll see, but I think that Jackson wants to play. I think he thinks he can contribute, and I think he can contribute as well. And I think maybe going to another spot for him is it would give him the idea that maybe he could go and show his work and then sign a deal later on, maybe next season or another 2 seasons from now.
I mean, he's boys with Nickel, and again, Nickel didn't want to leave, but look what it's done for him. He's playing in big time minutes. People are seeing him play. Like, there's a good chance he generates a contract next year. I'm sure Jackson's looking at that like, if I just had the opportunity to play, look what I could do and things like that. So you brought a good point in terms of like how the Pelicans want to play and how, looking at what JV's strengths are and Billy's strengths are and what the Pelicans want to do in terms of playing more up pace, playing with more tempo, getting up and down the floor, being an athletic team, how those two things kind of go separate ways. So the other part of that, and David Griffin's talking about this, is the Pelicans just have to be better at shooting the three. They were second to last in the NBA at 3-point attempts, 3-pointers attempted per game. 7 of the top 10 3-point shooting teams are in the playoffs right now. So that kind of tells you that you kind of need that piece. And David Griffin alluded to it. He said, you know what? We think our analytics team, like if the harshest person that David Griffin was on during his exit interview was the analytics team. He's like, we need to revamp it. It's below average and things like that. And I think a lot of that is talking to the lack of 3-point shooting, the lack of rim protection, the lack of playing with place and things along those things. And so my question to you is, how do the Pelicans, don't say Fred Vincent, how do the Pelicans get better at shooting the 3-pointer in next year's season?
I think there's 2 ways, right? We talk about, JV, right? We talk about some of the guys that's on the team that may have some value, something. I think the first thing you do is you look across the NBA and you look for a comparable salary of JV or a comparable salary of like a JV, Kyra, Garrett Temple trade or something like that with like a shooter that is not getting a lot of minutes, maybe had a bad year. 2 of the people I'm thinking about is like Joe Harris and like Duncan Robinson. And I'm not saying those guys are who you go trade for, but I'm saying like that type of player who, maybe having a bad year, maybe fell out of the rotation, but still has some capabilities of knocking down the 3 ball, because what you'll need from those guys is to shoot wide open threes, right? You won't need them to kind of like generate any offense any kind of way. So that's one way to do it. But if you go and look for the trade, in that case, I think if the first thing that comes out is they're looking for the shooter, then I think that the draft is going to say, hey, you're going for that big man. You're looking for that big man. Or vice versa, right? So if you go and you look, if you go and you say, hey, I want to make a trade and switch out JV for a center, right? A center for center swap or something like that. Then I think you go into the draft and you say, I told you this off the pod. There's a threshold for me personally. If you don't shoot at least 37, 38% from the 3-point line in college on a good amount of attempts, right? On a good amount of shots per game. I don't think the Pelicans need to even work you out. They don't need any more wing defenders, any more projects, anything like that. The threshold is 37% from 3. If you're not shooting 30, I might dip to 36 if I'm feeling really nice. I would prefer you to be closer to 40, right? If you're in the 40s, 41%, that'd be great. But I think that is the type of guy you need to look going to the draft looking for. If you decide to address the big situation via trade or by some miracle free agency, some kind of way, then I think as the shooter in the draft, you need to go at least 37 to 38% from 3. And I think that you need to go to Willie Green and say, listen, this is a shooter. He needs to be on the floor. I don't care about how young he is and things like that. Let this guy play next out there with Brandon Ingram and CJ and let him shoot and get his confidence and develop his game. But 37% is my threshold for the college workout. If you're not 37% on like 5 to 6 shots a game, 3-point shots, and even more, I probably would want a little more, 6 to 7 to 8 3-pointers a game. At 38%, I don't need to talk to you. We don't need to do pre-draft workouts. Don't need to do no pre-draft interviews. I need to see your 3-point percentage, and we're going to start from there because the wing stop, it is there. The defenders are there. You have Herb, you have Dyson behind him, you have Najee, you have all these guys that can play defense. The guy that you draft has to have at least 37% from the 3-point line on a good volume because that is the glaring hole in the Pelicans that we saw coming into the season. Now that the season is over, it was a glaring hole through the season, and it is still a glaring hole now.
It was a glaring hole last season, and the season before that as well.
Yes, it was.
You bring up a good point, and I see somebody in the comments mentioning it as well. The problem is, if you draft a player like that, there's not a guarantee that Willie Green plays him. And so in that scenario, you're looking at probably some type of veteran via trade or via free agents. You just said 37%, right? So here are your free agent shooters that shoot 37%. You got Seth Curry playing for the Nets, playing for the Nets, not really. Joe Ingles playing for the Bucks right now. You got Utah Watanabe. You got Max Strus for the Miami Heat, which I don't think he's leaving Miami. I think he's going to sign a contract. And you got Damian Lee shooting 38%. That is the list. That's what you got to pick from. So if that's what you're looking at, it's probably going to have to be a trade of some kind. Now, again, there's going to have to be moves made, whether it's draft or whether it's a trade or free agents or whatnot. But ultimately, I think that the team itself is going to have to be better at shooting the 3. One way you do that, Trey Murphy has to be a bigger part of the offense. He shot 41% from 3 this year, which was 6th in the NBA, 6th in the second-year player in the NBA. He finished with 6 assists per game. You and I talked about it. If we can get that to like 8 or 9, I think that is the sweet spot for Trey. I look at the Michael Porter Jr. role in Denver, and I think that could be Trey Murphy, except Trey Murphy's more athletic than Michael Porter Jr. That's the role I envision for Trey in year 3. But outside of that, I think your stars need to shoot more 3s. Now, it would start with all 3 of them being on the court. But I think Zion, again, like he got to a point where he was shooting about 1 per game. If he can get to like 2 or 3 per game, I think that's a good spot for him because, again, you want people to defend you differently. And like Zion's shot is not that bad. Like he shot 37%. He didn't shoot a volume of them, but just keep people honest. And I think that part will help. CJ made a career high in 3s this year, playing off ball, a lot of catch and shoot. I wonder why. Like, I think that is a signal of where his fit on this team plays. And then Brandon Ingram shot 39% from 3 on 4 attempts per game. Like, he should shoot more. And again, it helps with CJ available and Zion available so that Brandon Ingram shooting more catch and shoot 3s and now pull up 3s over a defender or whatnot and things like that. And so I think it's going to be a mix of those 4 guys shooting more 3s. Notice that I did not say Herb Jones. I said those 4 guys shooting a higher volume of 3s. Also adding to the mix by you have to trade some defense for offense. Like Griff talked about it. If you know that a good part of your scoring is going to be down at some point throughout the season. Now, you pray that they're available when it counts. But at some point in the season, you're going to need someone else like a pack a punch offensively. You got to be able to trade. And Willie Green has to. This is where we talk about the flexibility. You have to be uncomfortable playing a guy who's not great on defense, but knowing what he does for the offense and knowing how it makes everybody else's life a little bit easier. Like, again, when the Pelicans played the best, they were good on both sides of the ball.
Raph, I just watched Duncan Robinson lose his spot the entire season. And when the playoffs started, Eric Spoelstra went right back to Duncan Robinson because he knows sometimes you can't stop Giannis, right? You can't stop these players over and over again, these NBA offenses. But what you can do is spread the floor and match them with threes, right? And the Heat are up 2-1. So you have to, right to your point, sometimes you're not going to be able to find perfect players on both sides of the ball every single time, right? Herb Jones is never going to shoot like Trey Murphy. Trey Murphy is never going to defend like Herb Jones. But it's okay, right? It's okay because those guys do things really well that you can rely on them to do those things really well. And this shooter that whoever they go and get, you're not going to be able to find a guy that shoots 41% from the three-point line and is also first-team all-defense. They don't exist, and if they did, and if they do exist, then they won't be available for you to get. And so I think that is a very important part that you have to be comfortable being uncomfortable and some points of the time, because what we saw the team doing, the chucking and the not shooting, it just wasn't conducive to a modern NBA team to be successful.
Right. So we talked about the shooting. Obviously, that's a hot area for the team. Someone who could potentially help in this area and maybe in the other area, and we see him in the comments, that's all people are talking about, is Naz Reid. Again, LSU not graduate, but player and played down in this area. He's having a career year for the Wolves, averaging 12-5, really grew a spot and, built his name and built his brand around the league. I see the link to so many different Pelicans players like Naz Reid. Is that a realistic option? Like, look at what he's doing. Like, he was doing very well in terms of the role that he's in. He's not going to leave that role unless he goes and gets a starting role. Like, it doesn't make sense to go from backup 4 to backup 4 in a year where you're showing that your game is rising. And so in that scenario, he's looking for a starting job, which comes with starting money, which the Pelicans don't have. And so is that a realistic? Again, there's moves that can be made to free up some room, but like, do you think Naz Reid filling in the Pelicans gap, and does he address all the gaps that you would need if that's your big splash of the offseason?
Naz Reid is really, really, really good. His game has developed. Obviously, if you've not a lot of people watch the Timberwolves, but if you've been looking at and checking in on NBA, then you've seen like Naz Reid has always been a staple of Minnesota, right? He's always had a role, and then it kind of stepped up and developed more as the team got better, right? And I think that the team getting better, obviously you get Anthony Edwards and you make the trade for Rudy Gobert and things like that, but I think his development is part of the reason why they're so good, and I think you hit the nail right on the head. I mean, he's not coming here for a veteran's minimum. So you have to pay that guy. And, this is a guy who is coming off a career year for him, right? As far as like role, as far as stats go. And I think he's one of those guys that his stats say one thing, but his impact on the game says another. And I think even at 12-5, that he's probably a better value than 12-5. And so I think he's going to be looking for a payday. And again, when you are so top heavy, when you talk about contracts, right? And you talk about how much CJ and Zion and Brandon Ingram and those guys are making. That's a situation where you have to know that the cap is right there as well. And so, I think if you are, and again, he's not from Baton Rouge. He's not from New Orleans. He's not from Louisiana. So it's not like, oh, I'm going to come home and play. Like, he's from New Jersey. He's like Shaq, right?
There's no hometown discount. This is what you're telling me?
Yeah, right. There's no hometown discount. He's not coming to New Orleans because he loves the city of New Orleans and he loves gumbo. That's not why he's coming to New Orleans. It would be you sold him on a roll and you paid him. And the only way to do that is to shuffle the roster, right? Make trades in ways. And so, again, if you're clamoring for Naz Reid to be here, you have to find a trade for JV or a trade for Larry Nance, that team, the other team, I always tell people, just remember, it takes 2 teams to trade. You can't just say, oh, let's just trade JV. No, that's fine. But you have to find a team that's going to take that deal and also not send you back, a contract in the offseason as well. Because if you trade JV, you can't take any extra money, or you can take under, and then you would have to take that money and go try to sign Naz Reid. But again, those are tricky finances and tricky, kind of negotiations that you have to make. So, is he realistic? He is, if the Pelicans are willing to like blow some of these contracts up, right? Trade some of these guys and find trade partners for them, and then clear the books for a guy like Naz Reid, who's going to be looking for starting rotation, as well as starting rotation money. But I think it's like 30% realistic. I don't think that Naz Reid, as great as a fit as he would be on the Pelicans, and I would be surprised, pleasantly surprised if he ends up on the Pelicans. I just think that the money and the role, if you can't find a spot for JV like immediately, I think that Naz is going to be a hot commodity and people are going to be throwing money at him. There's a bunch of teams, whether they're young and developing,
there's a lot of teams
guy that could be a core, or if they're an older team and trying to get a guy to come in and be, to kind of push them over the edge where he might take a little less money to be a part of a championship team. I think you'll be competing with both sides of it. And the Pelicans, with their contract situation and their role situation, I just think that that's a spot that Naz Reid won't be clamoring to get into.
Right. I may have an unpopular opinion here, but I agree with what you just said in that, like, if that's the move you want to make, you could get there. Like, you could figure out a way to get there. But if you make that move, you better be sure that Naz Reid is the move, because you got
and just coming off an injury. Yep.
You have no flexibility in terms of the salary cap outside of that. Here's my issue. I think the reason why people like Naz Reid and what he's able to bring and what he could fit on this roster is his ability to shoot. Like, obviously, he's shown that that's a growing spot for him. Like, there was a couple games where he couldn't miss, but he shot 35% from 3 last year on 3 attempts. The reason Naz Reid didn't play a whole lot at LSU is because he could not defend. What did Willie Green just show you when guys couldn't defend at the 5 position? So between that and the fact that, like, I don't know how many shot attempts he's going to get, he's not a rim protector. He's not a great defender in terms of he's not switching. So if you're putting all your eggs in the basket for one player, that doesn't solve one of the big issues that you have at the big position. I just don't know if that's the move you want to push all your chips in the middle for. Like, a guy like Christian Wood, his game is kind of similar. Like, and he has better stats and a proven history. Like, they both are big guys who play more like long wings that like to shoot versus drive and play defense. So their games are really, and he's also a free agent. So, like, I don't know. I'd be hesitant. I would be a little bit hesitant on the Pelicans because I think you still have big holes in areas that you're going into the offseason trying to address. So we talk about the need for rim protection. We talk about the starting set. The Pelicans were second to last in the NBA in opponents' paint field goal percentage. They couldn't stop anybody. Nobody was blocking shots. JV wasn't blocking shots. Jackson wasn't playing. Larry had no knees. Nobody's getting blocks unless it's Herb Jones on the perimeter. And it brings up a good question, right? Like, I feel like today's center in the NBA is like today's running back in the NFL. Everybody needs one, but no one wants to pay for one. Like, 7 of the top 10 shot blockers are in the playoffs today. And the 3 that aren't, Miles Turner, Walker Kessler, who's incredible, and Kristaps Porzingis, pretty good players. Like, these are really good players that, like, you have to have one of them if you're going to be a good defensive team in the playoffs. But it's hard to hit them. Like, look at these names, Garrick. You got the best players in the league. You got Joel Embiid, Nikola Jokic, Anthony Davis. Those are like the best player on their team and probably the top 7 to 10 best talents in the NBA. And then you got other players in the playoffs that are good players on their team, like Sabonis and Bam and DeAndre and Rudy Gobert. And then there's a big cutoff. Like it is. Like look at the playoff centers. You got Mitchell Robinson, Jared Allen, Clint Capella, Al Horford, Brook Lopez. Those players aren't making a lot of money. Those players aren't getting a lot of shots. Those players, they aren't running the ball, feeding them in the post, back to the basket, go give me a bucket. Like they're just there to stand in the dunker spot and wait for alley-oops and put back dunks. And then you got like Nick Claxton, Zubov, Xavier Tillman, Kevin Looney. Like those are just serviceable big. So like if you look at all of the bigs that are in the playoffs today, like there's not a whole lot of great ones, right? Like there's a whole bunch of there's 3 great ones, and the rest are like, okay, good players, serviceable players win you a game here or there. So, like, do you really need to invest that heavily in a center? Like, JV is 3rd or 4th on the team in terms of his money toward the cap. Does your center need that? Answer that question for me.
I would say no, especially on a team that, like the Pelicans, who the offensive firepower of the starters, if you talk about a starter center, I'm clamoring for Trey Murphy to overtake CJ as far as like shot attempts per game. So now we're talking about Zion and Brandon Ingram and CJ and Trey. That's 4 people who are going to get shots. A lot of shots. Right. So obviously you saw JV have games, right, where he was knocking shots down and things like that. But what I think we saw a lot of was people missing, people being able to, it's a parade in my city to the rim. And so I think what you need is a big man who will willingly play defense. And they look at Phoenix, right? They have DeAndre Ayton, but behind him is like Bismack Biyombo, whose only role is to block shots. Just be in the middle and swing at stuff. When you think about like Mitchell Robinson, who is the guy I was talking about earlier. This is a guy that rim runs and, catches lobs and plays defense. But again, he's not getting paid a lot, right? $12 million on his contract. So I think that you have to look at when you think about like building a team and you talk about like in the NFL and stuff, like you have to look at what your team needs, in the window that you're looking for. You don't need a guy who's going to come in and get you buckets, right? You can get that from a lot of guys on the team, especially some of the guys that you talk about if you want to draft and bring in, if you're bringing in those kind of guys. What you need is a defensive player. You say it off the podcast, off the pod all the time. Show me the Jalen Duren of this draft. Show me that guy, right? Show me that guy. You need a guy that's going to attack the defensive, the rim defensively and be willing to not have a lot of shots on off. I talk about the dream scenario in Robert Williams and as like a guy I'm just out here to block shots, to play defense, and to rim run, right? I'll catch a lob every once in a while. Obviously, we talked about Miles Turner, who would have been great last season, right? We talked about how close the Pelicans may have been to, right? But you need a guy that's just going to shot block and stand in the corner and shoot threes. But if you're investing a lot of money right now in a center position and it's taking away from your wing depth, your shooting depth, your guard depth, or things like that, I think that's not a good business move. And right now, the Pelicans, what you saw the perimeter defense be great. They're a top 10 defense, even with JV not being a rim protector. That shows you the perimeter defense that they have. But if you just gave this team, one shot blocker whose only goal wasn't to do it, and you can get that for cheap. You can find that, do it by committee. You could do things like that. The Celtics, like you said, Robert Williams, Al Horford, and like who else, right? They don't have a JV. They don't have a DeAndre Ayton. So I think those are the type of guys that you need to get, and you can get there, relatively cheaper, at least specifically less than $15 million a year.
Right. So again, the Pels are going to be bargain shopping, whether it's for a shooter or whether for a big. So look at free agency. You got Brook Lopez. I doubt he lives in Milwaukee. Nikolai Vucevic ain't happening. Christian Wood. I could see a world in which he looks for a role where he can score, but I don't know if he would get that with the Pelicans. So Jakob Poeltl, who he had a nice little time in Toronto, but something tells me that team is going to look extremely different going into next season. Do you have Naz Reid? And then you got like placeholder guys like Mason Plumlee and Drew Eubanks and Kevin
Mm-hmm.
Love and Dwight Powell, players like that. So, like, to your point, like, you could hodgepodge a couple of pieces together that could make it work. And honestly, that might be the move that helps bolster you, because then you can spend that money elsewhere and bring more shooters. But to your point, I think the draft is where this team is going to have to look. And so you look at what the draft looks like historically over the last couple of years. So you got Jalen Duren. Hope, man, if, again, Dyson showed so much potential, but if Jalen Duren was on this Pelicans team, I think you see a much different type of team. Before him, you got Alfred Sengun. Before him, you got James Wiseman and Onyeka Okongwu. Before him, you got Jackson Hayes. Before him, you got DeAndre Hayden, Marvin Bagley, Wendell Carter, Mo Bamba. Like, a lot of hit and misses. Like, a lot of, this guy might be good in 3 years. This guy might be good in 2 more years. This guy's not good. This guy's going to be out of the league. Like, it's all over the place. And so, you know, for the Pelicans, I think this is a crucial offseason where you have to decide, are you going to invest in what you already know, or are you just going to continue to try to draft well and develop players? And as the choices are come up over the years, dictate where the money goes from there. Because, again, I can see it go either way. You get a young guy and he works out and he ends up being your center of the future, or you keep going from Derek Favors to Steven Adams to Jonas Valanciunas and try to figure it out that way. What are your thoughts on where do you think they land?
I think so. For, again, I talked about Mitchell Robinson earlier, and I'm seeing in the comments, I think that Mitch would be really good with this team, right? I don't know how feasible it is, but again, it's what I was talking about earlier. If the Knicks want to go big game hunting for a superstar and they say, okay, we need to share some of the salary. Here's Mitchell Robinson's $12 million. Would anybody take him and not give us any salary back or an expiring contract back or something small? I think that's what I meant about kind of sneaking in and maybe seeing if you can pry that away. Again, not knowing I don't know how feasible it is. We'll see how far the Knicks go and all of that and how they move. But, you know, that's an option. But like you said, I think the key for the Pelicans, if you let me decide, and if I was deciding, you need to find a center that's going to grow with this core right now, because what is happening is you're having to switch how you play with. Obviously, you have to switch all the time because Brandon Ingram's not playing, Zion's not playing, and things like that. Right. But it adds another level if you're like, okay, well, like you said, this year we got Derek Favors, who is he can shoot mid-range pick and pops, but mostly he's around the rim, small, but he's undersized center. Then you go to Steven Adams, who's not an offensive player, right? We were clamoring like, man, if we could just have somebody who was looking to catch the ball and score as opposed to just looking straight up instead of, you know, when Zion gets the dump off passes, we were clamoring for that. You get JV, but then it's like, oh, but he can't block shots. So it's like, you know, you're finding all of these different, you know, okay, he does this, he does that. And what I said earlier, you're not going to find a rim protect. You get very lucky. Like Miles Turner is one of one, and that's why he gets $20 to $30 million a year, because he can shoot the ball and he can play rim protect. But you know, you don't have the money for those type of guys, so you need to be comfortable saying, okay, maybe this guy isn't Jonas Valanciunas and gives you 30 on a night, on a random night against the Bucks. But what he does every night, I know that he's protecting the rim. He is looking to block shots and things like that. And I think very similar to what I was talking about with the shooting, as far as like you need to have 37% on a good volume. I think if you're going to draft route and you're looking for, you know, you're going to get the shooter in free agency or via trade or get a veteran shooter, and you're going to go young with the big, I think this is like you need to be heavy on the rim protection in your college career. You need to be heavy on the blocks. I don't even care about fouling, right? You see Jared Jackson that's what he does.
Defensive player of the year.
But he's defensive player of the year. Like if he fouls in college, it's fine. I need a guy who is looking to rim protect, and that's what he is known for, and that's what he gets paid for, and that's what he's good at. So, you know, again, it's very good. A lot of things are still moving parts in the NBA as far as like where the people are going and how they finish the team and things like that, and how they finish the season, and then what happens with their roster building after they finish the season. But I think that the Pelicans need to address the shot blocking in the worst way possible. And if there's a guy in the draft that they like who is a defensive specialist, then that's what they need to be entertaining. That you need to entertain the 37% and up, or you need to have 2 or 3 blocks per game kind of mentality. And those are the type of players that you need to be looking for.
Right. I think that it's very obvious what the team needs are. Again, I think anyone could tell you whether you watch a whole lot of Pelicans or not. It's very obvious what they are. But again, the way that the Pelicans go about approaching it is different. I mean, not very many people saw the CJ McCollum trade coming mid-season. Like, there's a lot of ways that Griff likes to move, and we shall find out in the upcoming weeks. But with that said, for you, again, a couple of weeks also have the draft, so we'll be breaking down prospects just like we did last offseason as well. But what you got left for the people, Garrick?
As always, people look through smiles, and I wish you could be is full of interesting storylines and interesting moves to be made, and so we'll be there to take you through it all. So as always, follow myself on Twitter at Garrick_Rattler. Follow my brother at Raphael_Rattler. Follow us on Twitter at PelsPod and on IG at Pels Podcast. Most importantly, subscribe to NewOrleans.network and go get you some of that new NOF IPA from Urban South Brewery. It is fantastic. You should go ahead and try to get some of that if you can. So we'll see you guys next week.
Yes, sir.
Hey, Venno.